Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that most people around you no longer question anything. The world has become so loud, so fast, and so oversaturated with information that the human mind, once a powerful tool for inquiry, discernment, and growth, has dulled. Think about that. What happens to a society where critical thinking disappears, where the ability to reason, challenge, and reflect is replaced by instant reactions, shallow opinions, and collective echo chambers? In this video, we're going to uncover the disturbing truth behind the disappearance of critical thinking and the dangerous rise of what some philosophers now call collective stupidity, a phenomenon where masses of people adopt shallow thinking, blindly accept narratives and surrender their intellectual independence without ever realizing it. And at the end of this journey, we will reveal the most urgent and powerful truth of all, the one that may determine whether we reclaim our minds or lose them entirely to a system designed to keep us comfortably numb. But before we dive in, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. The content you're about to see may challenge your perceptions and even shake the very foundations of how you view the world. Share this with those who dare to think, those who still believe that truth is something worth seeking. Let's begin with an uncomfortable truth. Thinking is hard, and in the modern world, it is often not encouraged at all. Our environment doesn't reward contemplation or deep analysis. It rewards speed, emotional reaction, and conformity. And this is not accidental. It is the result of deliberate design, from algorithms that methodically feed you only what you want to hear, to educational systems that prioritize memorization over exploration and critical inquiry. Society actively trains us to avoid critical thought. Philosopher Noam Chomsky warned about this decades ago in his analysis of media and propaganda. He explained how power structures rely on what he called the manufacturing of consent. In other words, when people are conditioned to consume without questioning and agree without understanding, they become easy to govern and even easier to deceive. Think about it. Critical thinking, once considered a fundamental human skill, is now treated as an inconvenience. It disrupts outrage culture, it slows down online debates, it challenges ideologies, and most importantly, it dares to ask, but is this actually true? In a world obsessed with being right, simply asking that question is seen as dangerous, because it requires a pause, an analysis, and the acceptance that you might be wrong. This shift means we are trading depth for speed, and truth for convenience. We don't want to appear difficult or argumentative, so we align ourselves with the collective voice, but a voice that lacks self-critique quickly devolves into collective stupidity. But how did we reach this point? The problem, in reality, runs far deeper than personal laziness. One of the key factors that is literally breaking our ability to think critically is the information overload we experience every single day. According to neuroscientist Daniel Levitin, the average person today processes 5 times more information per day than just a few decades ago. We are bombarded with notifications, messages, breaking news, opinions, ads, and updates during nearly every waking minute. Our brains were simply not designed for this volume of input. When the brain becomes overloaded, it starts cutting corners. Instead of critically evaluating ideas, it begins relying on mental shortcuts, cognitive biases, and groupthink just to navigate the chaos. It looks for cues not in logic but in the signals of others, peers, influencers, or authority figures. This phenomenon is known as social proof. It's a natural survival mechanism, but one that's incredibly easy to manipulate. Think about how often you've seen a post online with thousands of likes and comments and automatically assumed it must be true or important. That isn't reason speaking, it's a psychological shortcut. This is why collective stupidity spreads so easily, not because people are irrational, but because they've been trained to follow signals instead of logic. A brain under constant bombardment simply conserves energy. Added to this is another troubling trend, the decline of reading, especially deep reading. Neuroscientist Marianne Wolf describes how our brains are being rewired by digital media. We now skim rather than read, jump between tabs, and struggle to stay focused on long texts. But here's the catch. Critical thinking requires sustained attention. You cannot analyze, reflect, or truly understand anything if your attention is constantly fragmented. Ask yourself, when was the last time you read an entire article without checking your phone? When was the last time you heard a provocative idea and paused to think instead of reacting instantly? These small habits, once ordinary, are disappearing. The late Carl Sagan, one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, once warned, "We live in a society exquisitely dependent on science and technology, in which hardly anyone knows anything about science and technology." His concern wasn't just ignorance. It was the erosion of the ability to think critically about the very systems we depend on. In a world overflowing with opinions, outrage, and ideological warfare, the greatest act of rebellion is the quiet act of clear thinking. The problem we are facing is not purely technological or educational. It is deeply emotional and cultural. Critical thinking, by its very nature, is uncomfortable. It forces us to admit that we don't know something. It challenges our ego. It leads us into cognitive dissonance, where our most cherished beliefs collide with new, undeniable evidence. And in a culture that prizes confidence, certainty, and unwavering identity above all else, this is perceived as a profound threat. So instead of thinking, we defend. We retreat into our tribes. We repeat mantras. We avoid. We memorize slogans instead of engaging in dialectic, the honest, Socratic dialogue that for thousands of years was the engine of philosophical evolution. What we are witnessing is not simply a decline in intelligence. It is a societal shift toward mental laziness, and the consequences of this laziness are devastating. When people stop thinking, they stop asking questions, and when people stop asking questions, they become vulnerable to manipulation, to propaganda, and most dangerously to fear. The question we must ask is simple. Who benefits when a population no longer thinks for itself? To understand the roots of this collective decline, we must dig deeper, examining how certain systems evolved, not to nourish critical thought, but to suppress it. Consider the education system. Award-winning teacher and outspoken critic John Taylor Gatto argued that modern schooling does not exist to create independent thinkers. According to him, the truth is that schools don't really teach anything except how to obey orders. Gatto believed that compulsory schooling was engineered during the industrial era, not for enlightenment, but for factory life. Predictable, obedient, compliant minds that would not disrupt the system. Think about that. Instead of teaching how to think, we are taught what to think. From an early age, children are evaluated not by the originality or depth of their ideas, but by their ability to memorize and reproduce information. Conformity is rewarded. Curiosity is often treated as distraction. Over time, the message becomes unmistakably clear. Follow the rules, stay inside the lines, and don't ask too many questions. And this pattern doesn't end with school, it only intensifies in adulthood. At work, in media, even within our social circles, we learn that voicing doubt, challenging consensus, or holding an unpopular opinion can come at a high cost. The fear of social exclusion, the fear of being labeled difficult or controversial, is enough to silence even the most urgent questions, and we stay quiet. But silence, over time, becomes complicity. Psychologist Erich Fromm observed this in his work Escape from Freedom, explaining how many people secretly wish to surrender their freedom of thought, because true freedom carries responsibility, and responsibility can be frightening. Independent thinking means you can no longer blame others. You must face the uncertainty of truth itself, and for many, that burden feels too heavy. So we choose comfort, we choose distraction, we choose simplicity over complexity, and in doing so, we make ourselves incredibly easy to control. To truly understand the causes behind the rise of collective stupidity, we have to examine the battlefield inside the mind itself. Despite our belief in logic, the truth is that the human brain is far more emotional than rational. We like to think we make decisions based on facts, but the reality is far more complicated. In his groundbreaking work Thinking Fast and Slow, Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman showed that our brain operates using two systems. System 1, which is fast, instinctive, emotional, and automatic, and System 2, which is slow, deliberate, analytical, and effortful. And here's the catch. In our high-speed, always-on world, most people get stuck in fast mode. We simply don't have the time or the will to slow down and think deeply. So we rely on heuristics, stereotypes, and mental shortcuts, the kinds that feel right but are often wrong. This creates the perfect environment for mass manipulation. Politicians, marketers, media, they all understand how to exploit these shortcuts. They package complex issues into simple binary oppositions. They use emotionally charged language to bypass reason. They repeat narratives until we accept them as truth, not because we verified them, but because they became familiar. And the danger is that once we accept something as truth, the brain begins to defend that belief, no matter the evidence. This is called confirmation bias, and it is one of the most powerful cognitive traps. Think about your own beliefs. How often do you actively look for evidence that contradicts them? How often do you truly listen to opposing arguments instead of preparing your counterattack? If we're honest, probably not as often as we'd like. And that's not a flaw, it's human nature. But it becomes a problem when we fail to recognize it. Another key concept is groupthink, the phenomenon where the desire for harmony or conformity within a group leads to irrational or dysfunctional decisions. Psychologist Irving Janis, who coined the term, found that even very intelligent, well-meaning people can make disastrous choices when they suppress dissent and avoid critical evaluation. Why does this happen? Because challenging the group feels dangerous. Going against the current requires more than intelligence. It requires integrity and courage. Yet history teaches us that progress has always come from those who dare to think differently. Galileo, Darwin, Martin Luther, King Jr. Their ideas were rejected, ridiculed, condemned, but they thought anyway. And their willingness to challenge the collective ignorance of their time shaped the world we live in today. But remember this, critical thinking in a society that punishes doubt is an act of rebellion. So what can we do? We can begin with cultivating awareness. Awareness of our mental habits, awareness of the sources we consume, awareness of when we are genuinely thinking and when we are merely reacting. A powerful practice is metacognition, thinking about your own thinking. Ask yourself, what is influencing my opinion right now? Am I open to being wrong? Am I engaging with this idea or just passively absorbing it? Another path is intentional practice of dialectical thinking, the ability to hold two opposing ideas in tension and explore them. It allows you to move beyond binary thinking, beyond us versus them, into the space where true understanding can emerge. We have reached the very heart of this crisis. Beneath the digital noise, beneath institutional inefficiency, beneath cultural polarization, lies something far more insidious. And here is the most important truth. Critical thinking is disappearing, not because people are incapable of it, but because they are afraid of what it might reveal. To think critically is to risk everything that gives us psychological safety, our identity, our beliefs, our tribe. We live in an era where identity has become sacred. People define themselves by their opinions, their affiliations, their ideologies. Challenging an idea is now perceived as a personal attack. But it is this illusion that destroys thought. You are not your ideas. You are not your political party. You are not your religion. You are a human being with the capacity to grow, to learn, and to change. Here is the final truth. Critical thinking is not just an intellectual skill. It is a spiritual act. It is the act of honoring truth over comfort, growth over certainty, and freedom over approval. It is the quiet decision to live with your eyes open, even when the light burns. For as the philosopher and psychologist Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul and facing our inner world, our inherited beliefs, our illusions. That is the essence of critical thinking. When you begin to think critically, you become harder to manipulate. You begin to see through the illusion. You stop being a passive consumer and become an active seeker of truth. And in that act, however small it may seem, you ignite a flame that has burned in every philosopher, every truth seeker who refused to stop thinking. Your invitation is not merely to think, but to awaken, to stop living as a product of your environment and begin becoming the architect of your own mind. This is your responsibility, and when you accept it, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see clearly. You begin to live in alignment with your own hard-won truth. So now the question stands before you. Will you do the same? Let others wander through slogans and screens. Let them trade their freedom for approval, but not you. You are awake. The most revolutionary thing you can do in this very moment is not to shout, not to obey, not to repeat, but to think. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Stay curious, stay awake, and above all, keep thinking.